Oh. Hi, everybody. Say that again.
I've been speechless like 3 times.
Guys, we're on live. Guys, we're on live.
Yes, sorry. In a minute.
House Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee. It is Thursday, March 2nd. We're here this morning to talk about H125. There's an energy in the room. If you're at home on YouTube watching this 100 years from now,
Everybody feel it too.
everybody has had a lot of carbohydrates and caffeine, I think.
Not enough.
Thank you to Representative Brumstead and Representative Dolan for being with us today and taking time away to talk with us about this bill. So folks who are the third of us who are veterans of Gov.Ops, I think will remember that Representatives Gannon and LeClaire and the members of the Sunset Advisory would go through this process of looking at all the boards and commissions that we've put into statute that have been set up over the years and seeing which ones are sunsetting, which things had a purpose that's now defunct, but it's still on the books that we need to repeal, and would come up with a big bill for us to take a look at cleaning up that statute or maybe extending sunsets of things that were really actively doing work. H125 does a lot of that. But I think at the top, the biggest thing we need to think about is how do we want this process to move forward? How do we want to think about not just the cleaning up the boards and commissions that are defunct and sort of have served their purpose and need to be taken off the books, but also some of the questions that we wrestled with last biennium. There was a very brief report about per diems, for instance, so the compensation and how we defray expenses. Some boards have very little need to meet very often, and there's not a lot of prep. Other boards are quasi-judicial and have enormous amount of work that they have to do in order. So there are equity issues around compensation. And then I think what we're going to hear from our guests today is a little bit about the Government Accountability Committee, the GAC, as it's so lovingly referred to here, and what the future of that should be. So this bill, even though most of it is about the normal boards and commissions bill, I think there's a couple of policy things for us to consider in the context of H125. And so I'd like to hear from our guests this morning. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. Thank you very much. I have a hard time not saying Madam Chair. I was just thinking, is it Mr. Chair? Is that what? Right, yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that introduction, because I think that that's going to be very helpful. Of course, today we're going to talk about government accountability, which is a controversial topic after the one you've just taken on, or maybe just the opposite. So good morning. For the record, I'm Jessica Brumstead, a state representative. And just so you know, I did write up my notes and I'll pass them on only because I have a way of moving all over the place and not actually accomplishing the goals that so I'm going to read. So
We're with you.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Jessica Brumstead, a state representative from Chittenden 7, which is Shelburne and St. George. I'm here as a member of the Joint Legislative Committee on Government Accountability. And as a member of this committee, the Government Accountability Committee, and a past member of your committee, Government Operations, I was asked to sponsor this bill along with Representative Karen Dolan to stress the importance of government accountability for our legislative body. But first, I think it's important to provide a little history about the Sunset Commission and all its recommendations, just so you know how it all fits together. So my first year in the legislature in 2016, I was a member of this committee, as I just said, and Representative Maida Townsend was the chair. And during the budget process, which is what we're all going through now, we decided we didn't have a lot in government operations to go over as far as on the budget, whereas now that I'm on human services, wow, what a difference. But we decided that we were going to really look closely at the boards and commissions, committees, and understand better the costs that are associated with those. So what happened is we quickly realized it was not going to be an easy task. And our chair put Representatives John Gannon and Warren Kitzmiller in charge of bringing us back a report. The report showed there were many boards and commissions that hadn't met in years, and others that worked all the time. Some were quasi-judicial, others were not. Some were given stipends and staff, others only received mileage reimbursement. Overall, there was much work to be done, so we introduced legislation to create a sunset commission that sunsetted itself, to hear from the commissions and boards whether it made sense for each to continue and to recommend changes. Hence, the legislation that you are poised to review today, which Legislative Council will walk you through, I'm not going to do that, is what brings Karen and I here, or Karen and me here today. And this is the final piece. Government accountability is the final piece that went into the report. So the Joint Committee on Government Accountability asked to be sunsetted. Why? Although I want to state very clearly for the record today that this does not mean we want government accountability to go away. Actually, just the opposite. Our Joint Committee of GAC believes government accountability is more important than ever. But the responsibility is with all of us, not just one committee, and all of our committees throughout this building. And so later, we'll also talk about an amendment that we're proposing to be added, or that the committee may want to. We didn't actually have it made into an official amendment. We want to give you all the opportunity to think about whether or not you want to do it as a committee. The Government Accountability Committee was created in Title II, Chapter 28, Section 970. Over a decade ago, the House and Senate Government Operations Committees, so it started here, worked together, led by then Representative Diane Snelling and then Senator, I think is the way it went, to pass the government accountability legislation. The statute was written 10 years ago, and our ability to collect data and review that information at that time was very limited and expensive. Our recommendation to develop population outcomes as set forth in Title III are mostly relevant to state governments department by department, more the administration. Program level performance measures informing population level indicators. Hang in there with me in this a bit. Assessing the effectiveness of population level indicators in measuring progress to achieve population level outcomes, and annually review population level indicators in the context of new data development. Yes, this is jargony. Absolutely. Essentially, what I'm saying is that the state outcomes report that we've all heard about is a picture of what is the conditions of life for Vermonters today. It is not a performance report that can inform the legislature if they are meeting the goals of specific legislation. There is a clear need in today's world for something closer to a performance report. For example, 4 years ago, we passed legislation to address the need for more early education providers. We created programs that included scholarships and loan repayment, and then we measured those outcomes and learned that, yes, these programs were working. Then 2 years later, we added to the language based on the information we were collecting that could make it even better, continuously improving upon our work. When we write legislation with performance goals in mind, we need to also think about how will we know if we are meeting those goals? What can we measure to get at that information, and how much will it cost to set up those systems? When will the committees of jurisdiction go back and look to see if we are meeting those goals? The good news is there is a lot already happening. For example, Building Bright Futures is collecting data about our childcare centers and early educator providers. The Climate Council is collecting data to show us if our work is having the intended outcomes necessary to reduce carbon emissions, among many other things. And the Office of Racial Equity, the Health Department, the list of siloed information throughout state government goes on. And all that information is important and informs the work we are doing so that we can look back and say, yeah, we're having the impact we wanted, or no, maybe we need to tweak that legislation in order for it to work better, or maybe we need to sunset it because it's really not having its intended impact. Of course, I just lost my place. It is very important that we as a legislature not lose the importance of accountability in government, rather raise it to a level where all legislative committees feel some responsibility to go back and look at the laws we pass to make certain the goals we set out to meet are actually being met. And if not, why not? In conclusion, we are here this morning to ask that you consider sunsetting, Title II, Chapter 28, Section 970, the language that created the Government Accountability Committee, and adding an amendment that would create a Government Accountability Summer Committee to begin the important work of exploring how we can both use evidence to inform policy and as a body look back at our laws to ensure accountability, bringing back a report to this committee next January to help you consider next steps. Karen is going to spend just a few minutes talking about that amendment, and there are 3 specific things we would do in the amendment. And we can answer questions after that. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So Representative Karen Dolan, and so I began on GAC, the Government Accountability Committee, last session. And I would say, so it was brand new to me. And it was also clear that it seemed like the committee had run its course for the work that needed to be done. And we're like, okay, so what are we doing for next steps? And so completely agree with the idea to sunset it. And I feel like this is a really exciting opportunity to shift the work that was proposed and create this summer commission to think about, okay, so now how can this work continue in a new format? And so that's what we're asking. So you'll see the bill before you. It asks to sunset the GAC commission. But then we've been having conversations of, okay, so if we sunset it, there's still going to be some of these gaps that need to happen. And so that's where the amendment comes in, is we were like, well, can we actually, we'll sunset it, but can we create this commission that will fill some of those gaps? So that's how this is coming, all this language is coming at you. And what the amendment really takes into account is GAC's request to sunset, but it creates a path forward for some of these other things that came up. And what that was is for the legislature, as Rep. Brumstead shared, we have a lot of boards and commissions. That's something that we do, right? And it's a significant way that we get work done. And it also creates a significant opportunity for us to look at accountability. So we're saying for GAC, can they look at boards and commissions to take into account accountability? So it's for one, it's taking one step for accountability, but it's also following up work on the Sunset Commission, because as Rep. Brumstead shared, the Sunset Commission also has now sunsetted. So we have this gap, right? So we're saying we want to be looking at accountability. We're saying we need to look at boards and commissions about their effectiveness, and there's some topics that are there, but yet we don't have an entity to do that. So we're saying create the summer commission to look at all of these things to make it happen. And so I don't think you have been shared, or they have?
Draft 1.3 of the amendment that seeks to accomplish what you've described, Representative Dolan, is on our legislative page under H125. So it's draft number 1.3. So that the way this amendment is structured is that, as opposed to, we've been looking at a bunch of strike all amendments. This is the instance of amendment that pops in a new section to accomplish this piece.
Yes.
The H125 is introduced.
Yes, instead of doing a strike call to the whole H125, we're just saying insert this piece of it. So I know this is kind of weird because you haven't even looked at H125 yet, but when you do, we're asking that you also consider adding this language to it, which would create this summer committee that would really have three role. So we would still say, get rid of the Government Accountability Committee, but create the summer one, which would look at, take a look at the legislative branch to see what are some mechanisms that we can put in place to really look at our accountability. Is it reinstituting the government account? I don't think it is, but maybe that's what that committee will come up with. They're going to come up with some ideas of how we want to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable. The other thing that they would look at is looking at pay across commissions, boards, and joint legislative committees based on the nature of the service and required skill level. So we're giving that as another responsibility of this summer commission. And then also codifying mechanisms for controlling and restraining the increasing number of commissions, boards, and joint. We know this, right? We have lots of commissions and boards. How can we clean that up a bit? So we're saying the summer committee could be instituted and do all that work and come back to you with a plan.
We'd also look at equity to make sure we know that a lot of BIPOC and Indigenous peoples, we ask them to be on a lot of these committees, on these commissions and boards, and it's a lot for these folks to be able to participate. And so we need to look at that much more closely.
I appreciate you saying that, Representative Brumstead, because we heard a couple of weeks ago in Director Susanna Davis' testimony from the Office of Racial Equity that we do ask the same folks to show up and represent the communities they come from pretty often, and that there might be opportunities she suggested to look at, could we combine some of these things or have them meet, contemporaneously or, in order to help make it a little easier for some of those folks to serve, and then thinking about issues about pay equity and all of that. I really appreciate you bringing this to us when we had conversations about sort of what's the future of the GAC. There are other people who have said, well, we have a Gov.Ops committee. And I said, have you looked at the jurisdiction that we have and the amount of policy that we're asked to take a look at in here? The idea of looking under the hood of all of how we do the things that are covered in this amendment, I thought was a little bit much for our committee to do in the swirl of the legislative session. So I appreciate you bringing this.
I wonder, after I read that, and we all are here, I actually wonder for our chair and for all of you to think about if we might even want to add a fourth job into this amendment for the government, even though I hate to say that because it might be us on that committee. But would be around the towers of information that we're getting, the Climate Council, Building Bright Futures. How do we make that information more accessible to the public so that they can easily find out how we are doing? Are all this money we're spending on housing, are we actually increasing the number of affordable house? Are we housing more of our homeless and more permanent? Those sort of things. Like, how do you look at the data as a layperson? How do you know how your government is doing? And that might be something we could at least put into the report as an advisory. We might want to do this or that. That's another piece. And we were also we've already reached out to NCSL to see if they can be helpful, the National Council of State Legislators, to see if they could be helpful on what's happening in other states, because there's a lot around performance.
Anything else you want to leave us with, or questions from the committee before we get into H125?
Yes, it will step out for that.
Yeah, right. Go ahead, Representative.
So, okay, I think you just answered it, Mr. Chair. We're going to talk, Tim's going to speak to the actual bill then. I'm looking at it and I just saw it for it, but I'll hold my comment until then on.
This might be second to technical corrections as like the driest thing that we do.
That's why we're stepping out.
I'll just throw it out there. What I was going to bring up is I'm looking on page 2, line 7. Couldn't agree more with that statement. Codifying mechanism of controlling and restraining the increasing number of commission, boards, and joint legislative committees. The largesse of that, I've had people comment to me, constituents going, my God, how many summer committees do you folks have? And they're right. It's gargantuan, and I think, in my opinion, and that's my 0.02 as one of 150 of us, but I can't refute that when I get those kind of emails So I'm glad to see that we're
So,
hopefully doing something.
They respond to that?
can I have Representative Dolan respond and then I'll go to you, Representative Maruki?
I completely agree, and I just want to point out the irony of it, that we're asking to create a summer commission to look at the committee, but I think
That's my point.
Study committees?
yeah, I think your chair brought up why, we just have so much work to do that let's
Yeah, no,
take this.
no, I got it.
So I just want to point that out, like we realize it kind of goes backwards.
No, I think we have to be very mindful of it because people are watching.
And isn't that part of the problem we have as part-time legislators, is getting all the real information in order to make good decisions? We often have to do the work outside of the session because we're so busy inside of the session. So that whole sort of balancing act is really interesting as well. Because I agree, when I first came here, I was like, oh my God, there's so many summer committees. And
Oh, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we should expand our roles and do more. I'm saying just the opposite, actually, but, so we might have a fundamental disagreement there, but that's okay.
Representative Maruki.
And I'm going to push back on all this. I think you touched on it. We are a part-time legislature, and the reality is that we are being looked at as a full-time legislature now to try and cram a year's worth of work in 5 months. And even when we're out of here, the requests of our constituents and committees continues. And I think the bigger picture is not that we have too many boards and commissions, but we need that to supplement what's being asked of us throughout the year. And I think a bigger question is, does a part-time legislature really serve in a culture and a society that's becoming more and more complex and more is being asked and demanded of us?
I think as we look to the proposal of amendment, that the charge, if the committee, chooses to take the GAC and say, you got a summer to figure out what the future is, because that's really what this is, right? We're not creating a new thing. We're saying this thing we have isn't working. Let's do it differently. Let's think about it differently. Here's a new charge. Tell the legislature how to do this in the future, because what we're doing right now just isn't meeting our legislative goals. Representative Higley and Representative Nugent, sorry.
Thank you both for being here. Just wondering, is GAC still involved with, used to be Sue Zeller, the Chief Performance Officer, who basically had an accountability performance standard program that's supposedly supposed to come back every year to us as well. Is that still ongoing?
Yeah, excellent question. And she retired. So we have someone new, Jason, I forget what his last name is.
Yeah.
But, and that's exactly the reason that we're here, is that what we were really doing is, that was an administration look back at how is the administration doing? How are all our departments doing? Are they meeting their goals? And so we were sort of rubber stamping what was presented in the outcomes report, but of a moment in time, not so much looking back at our work. And that's sort of why we got here.
Wouldn't it necessarily be the same? I mean, if they're looking at agencies and what that performance outcome looks like, wouldn't you just take a look at that and extrapolate from that what the legislature is doing, good or bad?
You could, but it's way back. It's looking way back then, because the laws we pass, by the time you're able to check them through some of that work, like how many people are smoking, right? They check that number. And that shows maybe a law that we passed, who knows when, about various changes in tobacco. How is it having an impact today? What we're saying is that as the legislative branch of government, shouldn't we be looking back at what we're doing here as a committee, like the childcare example, going back and saying, is that law that we passed just 2 years ago working? Is that money we spent in ARPA actually having its intended? It would be every time we went, and I tried to do this in the bills I wrote because I was a member of that committee for 6 years, so I knew what we were getting at. So every bill that I wrote, I tried to put a performance note in it and really say to the state, to the department, so mostly the Agency of Human Services, can you track this for me? And they couldn't. It was really expensive or just not something anyone in, they didn't have the personnel or they didn't have the chart, whatever. So in the end, we have all started to create that. Things like the Climate Council that measures and things like the Building Bright Futures, that's quasi judicial. I mean, it's a public-private partnership. They're tracking things. And that's really helping us to know if we're doing a good job. And the public really wants to know if we're doing a good job. And I think that that's an important thing to be moving forward on, especially in today's world where we have the opportunity to collect the data for less money than we used to.
If I might add a piece to it, I feel like that is an important report that comes out, the outcomes report. So this would obviously not impact that at all. It would still come out. I think another piece that's hard with it is when we're looking at those data, it's hard to align what was it that legislatively led to those outcomes. There can be so many different factors. And so I think we want to take a fine look at what is it legislatively that we're doing and what is the impact of that. So there's the two sides of it.
Thank you.
Representative Nugent.
Thank you. I just want to say, I think I'm excited about this idea because I think, data is so important and the quality of data and where you get it from. And when you're looking at it, just, to be able to get a better sense of how that's impacting the work that the legislature is doing. I appreciate that sentiment. I would love to be part of that committee.
All right.
So one of you is off the hook. So if there are no more questions from the committee, I will let Representatives Brumsted and Nolan go as we look at the underlying bill. And today is all about intros on this, and we'll pick up ceremonial back from the clock.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That chair. Yeah, that's best committee.
I know they're jealous. See it on
Tim, please come join us. So there are a couple of documents that I think are useful here while Tim's getting set up. Under Representative Brumsted's name, there's a file with a giant spreadsheet and notes that I think is a useful reference for all of the different recommendations that are going to be in the bill. And then Tim, in his infinite wisdom, has a summary of the bill for us up on the page. Thanks for being here to kind of give us a 10,000 to 30,000 foot view of this big bill.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me, Chair McCarthy. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel, for the record. Let's see, I think, let's see. So just like to point out that the bill is 140 pages long. And so indeed, I thought it appropriate to summarize it in a supplemental document that's posted online. And of the contained within that summary are some of the relevant comments about either the repeal sunset, which is a prospective repeal, or some of the modifications of the roles, duties that may have occurred in some of the boards and commissions that are being amended, the statutes that are being amended pertaining to those boards here. And then others are simply just simple repeals. I'll just kind of run through that. So I'll make my way through the summary and point out on the pages in the larger bill, or in the bill itself, where these can be found. And I'm happy to dive into the particular language as we kind of make our way through that. That sounds good to the chair.
That sounds great.
Okay, perfect. So H 125 is a bill to serve as a vehicle for the Sunset Advisory Commission's recommendations. As previously noted by the representatives speaking before me, this Sunset Advisory Commission has sunset itself. It's no longer in existence. As currently written, this bill will either repeal or prospectively repeal sunset 11 different boards and commissions, and will amend one commission's provisions two commission's provisions And I've organized these by sections by title order, so where they appear in the Vermont statutes annotated overall. I have inserted numerous reader assistant headings, in which you have the star, 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 and then what they are to kind of break it up into various parts relevant to each committee. Some committees have many more sections than others. The majority of this bill, approximately 100, exactly 120 pages of the 140 pages pertain to the repeal of just two boards in particular. One, the Board of Health, the other, the Natural Gas and Oil Resources Board. So starting with section 1, the first part of the bill pertains to Government Accountability Committee, which you just heard a lot about. Section 1 repeals this, and then section 2 puts in some legislative intent regarding government accountability. And that very much speaks for itself. I'm happy to pause there for a moment before moving on to the next part.
Questions so far? I think we're good.
Okay. On page 2, we have State Boards and Commissions Registry. This is section 3. And this is a revision from Tanya Marshall, the State Archivist and Chief Records Officer, and in some reduces the number of items to be tracked by the State Archivist, who recent legislation is setting up a database for these boards and commissions so that people can know what they are, what their missions and duties, responsibilities are, and if they will be sunsetting anytime soon.
We should have taken Tim on our tour to the State Archives last Friday. I didn't make that connection, Tim. I apologize. Next time we go to the State Archives.
Hindsight's 2020.
But I believe Tanya did mention to us that she is pretty proud of the work that they've done to keep track of all these boards and commissions that have been created over the years, and that informs this process. It's how we actually have the data to do this process. So we are in her debt.
The next part pertains to the Vermont Pension Investment Commission. This is section 4 on page 2. And the amendments are made to make the commission more independent from the treasurer, essentially. So, the next part pertains to the repeal of the Agricultural Finance Program Advisory Panel. This is in section 5, found on page 4. That's just a simple repeal. The next part on page 5 pertains to the repeals of the Coalition for Healthy Activity, Motivation, and Prevention Programs, or CHAMPS, and the Fit and Healthy Advisory Committee. These are just simple repeals. The next part on page 5 repeals the Birth Information Network Advisory Committee in section 7. Also just a simple repeal. The next part is the first substantial chunk of the bill, and it starts on page 6 and regards the repeal of the Board of Health and conforming revisions. That is reassigning rulemaking authorities, other duties to either the commissioner or the department itself. And this runs approximately 75 pages, I believe, sections 8 through 131, as it involves kind of extracting the board references to it from many different statutory sections.
We'll have some testimony on the background on this change. It's pretty significant.
And I'd just like to point out that the transfer of rulemaking authority is in section 131 on page 81. And let's see. I think that's it for now. The next part pertains to the prospective repeal of Nuclear Decommissioning Citizens Advisory Panel. And this is on page 82 in section 132. And this installs a sunset or prospective repeal date of January 1st, 2030. The next part, beginning on page 82, section 133, regards the repeal of the Vermont Prescription Drug Advisory Council. That's also just a simple repeal. The next part on page 82, section 134, pertains to the repeal of the Vermont Employment Security Board. Or sorry, no, it amends it. It does not repeal it. I apologize. It's just. Sorry about that. The next part, starting on page 83, is the other substantial block of changes, running 44 pages in regards to the repeal of the Natural Gas and Oil Resources Board and statutory framework. Again, this is section 135, and really affects an entire chapter, chapter 14 of title 29. Let's see. It is only one section, again, running 44 pages from page 83 to 127. And it repeals all but the prohibition language for hydraulic fracturing in the state in section, 571 on page 127. And it was my understanding is that this block of strike all versus just a simple line removing it is kept in to emphasize to legislatures the potential significance of what is being removed, in which case perhaps to spark review dialogue of replacing this board if wanted. But I would like to stress again, the prohibition language is maintained. The next section pertaining to the repeal of the review board on retail sales on page 128, section 136, just a simple repeal. The next part on page 128 regarding the prospective repeal of Clean Energy Development Board. This is in section 137. And let's see, this will be the prospective or repeal or sunset date is June 30th, 2025. The next part, page 137, section 138, pertains to the repeal of the Vermont Telecommunications Authority. Another simple repeal. The next part on page 137, section 139, pertains to the repeal and transfer of duties of the Private Activity Bond Advisory Committee. Here I'd like to note that the authority is transferred to the treasurer in coordination with the Secretary of Administration and Secretary of Commerce and Community Development and any bond issuing authority of the state or instrumentality of the state that is eligible to issue private activity bonds. And then that ends the bill with the effective date section on page 140, section 140, funny enough. And this has various effective dates relating to whether if some of the boards will be put on a sunset versus just being repealed. And so that's what those various dates come to. And that's a summary of the high level. That concludes my summary of the high level review of this bill. Happy to go back and look at any of the particular language.
So high level, just how this came together, because some of the folks who would have, really given us the what happened on the board, like I would love to invite Representative Gannon if he's willing to come talk to us after the break about sort of how Sunset Advisory works and the process. But as you were asked to draft this bill, did you have contact with folks from like the Department of Health on the Board of Health repeal? So how did, for instance, that section sort of come to you as one of the things that the sponsors were including?
Sure, absolutely. The Sunset Advisory Commission would, just referencing that very large spreadsheet, but systematically made their way over a few years through each of the boards, commissions, committees that were being flagged for review. They would invite witnesses in, take testimony from members of the board or the associated kind of overseeing or related aspects of the executive branch. Then often, if there was consensus built in the committee, if it wasn't a simple repeal or if there was wanted adjustments or modifications to current statutes or sunset prospective repeals to be in place, we typically work with or we take suggested language from the subject matter experts. The Board of Health is a great example of that. We took suggested language in those repeals from the Department of Health and some of their technical experts there, helping really to kind of direct exactly how the board would be sunset, repealed, while making sure that the rest of the regulatory apparatus stayed intact, which included transferring any necessary duties, responsibilities to other entities, typically the administration subdivision.
All right. So questions about pieces that are in here? There's a ton of information. I'm going to be on an airplane, and this is one of the things that I'm going to be digging through to see, like, who do we need to talk to before we would be able to move this bill? And if there are specific pieces that the committee looks at and goes, wow, how did the Sunset Advisory Commission come to that recommendation? Those are the kinds of questions I want to make sure that when we get back and take a look at this before crossover, that we get answers to. Because what I have found with this bill is that you look at some of the things and go, wow, we're like removing pages and pages, but that there's been a multi-year plan to have the duties of that word transferred somewhere, or that the reason that that thing was created in the beginning doesn't exist anymore because it's been wrapped up with something else. So the Sunset Advisory Commission usually has a really good explanation for these things, but words on the page can look kind of alarming. So we'll want to do our due diligence on that. There was one piece, I think it was section. So on VPIC, for instance, the amendments that were made there, were those done in consultation with the treasurer's office? I might want to just make sure as we look at this that it conforms to what we did in the pension bill last biennium.
Sure. Sorry. Which section is this?
This would be section 4, the Vermont Pension Investment Commission.
Yes. This, if memory recalls, I think the suggested edits, amendments language came from the commissioner, the commission itself.
Okay.
The treasurer's office did provide us with suggested language for, let's see, I know the Private Activity Bond Advisory Committee. And I'd have to double check to see exactly. They provide language for once, but.
I have a strong belief that Representative Gannon, as one of his last acts as a legislator, probably had a hand in the VPIC language. And I just want to make sure that we've closed the loop and understand that that those changes sort of reflect the spirit of the work that the Gov.Ops committee did last biennium to improve the governance. So we'll take a little testimony on that, hopefully from the now former chair of the Sunset Advisory Commission and the treasurer's office before we act on that piece. That's one that really jumped out at me. Is there anything else that folks want to flag as popping out to them that they want to hear specific testimony on when we get back?
Okay. The only thing, I mean, it might just be a matter of reading it, but what was that big lug 44? Of the natural gas and oil resources. That's the only thing that stands out.
Yeah, that is, I think, intentionally put there, as Tim said, to catch our eye and get us asking some questions. So we'll have I guess somebody from A&R probably would have staffed that. Am I right reading?
That would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so the notes here on that Sunset Advisory Commission reviewed December 21st, December 2021 memo that day sent to our committees. Requesting the committees of jurisdiction, the questionnaire returned by A&R indicated the board is defunct. All right, well, so we have that line in the giant spreadsheet. Committee consensus was to repeal September 21st, 2022. So we'll do a quick hit on when was the last time that board met, and is there something that we missed? Great. Well, Tim, thank you for giving us the high level overview. I'll be doing my homework on this over the break, and we'll spend a little time figuring out what the next steps are before we get to the end of our crossover week when we get back.
And just one other note I'd like to make is the questionnaires that are referenced in here should still be available online under the the materials that were posted publicly for this Sunset Advisory Commission. So they should be relatively easy to track down if you want that kind of deeper dive into what some of the written testimony that was provided to that committee.
Okay. We'll be learning a lot about the Sunset Advisory Commission, and then try to figure out what to do next with this few years of work going through this massive list of boards and commissions. It is really wild to look at these hundreds of lines. Thank you, Tim. So we've got the Vermont Press Association coming in. Are anybody here yet? No one's here yet? Okay. So let's just take a quick beat here. Our guests should be arriving in a couple minutes. For the proper striking. Yeah. That is what it's called in like 40 states.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, John.
Hi, John.
Hey, John, how are you?
90 people.
We just wrapped up our testimony on the previous bill, and we're just giving our guests from the Press Association a couple minutes to come in, but we decided not to go off live and then have to reboot. So we were being kind of quiet in here in committee, so that probably sounded a little funny. Just trying to, the slight awkwardness that we still have with these hybrid meetings. So welcome to the committee. We'll, I think we'll wait for Mike to get here on the Zoom. We've got a couple minutes before we were scheduled for 10.
That sounds good. Thanks.
We got through a high level overview of a very big bill very fast.
I guess, but the explanation of the 45 plus other states actually use that.
It's not quite that many, but yes. Wow, that wall. Yeah, so much.
Yeah, it's getting.
Yeah.
You just don't want it to go like this. Wrap around over there.
Oh, it will by the next year.
Yeah. True.
We are still live, even though we're on a slight pause while we wait for our next witness to come on.
Don't add minutes of that into this.
Just a warning, just a public service announcement. All right, great.
There's Mr. Dunn.
Everybody get situated here. Yeah, go ahead. We'll be just a moment. Mike, thanks for being with us.
Hello, Mr. Donahue.
Yeah, I never looked that close.
Hi.
I always said,
just like,
I was like, I go good with it.
It's good.
Blue.
Those two have on point to their same
I know.
color, same tie,
I'm
same.
trying to think of like,
Great. So Mike, thanks for being with us, and John. I appreciate the opportunity to have the Press Association give us an introduction today, because I imagine that especially after crossover, we're going to be digging back into questions about open meeting and public records. No worries. Excuse a little bit of background noise.
Sure.
But I don't know if the mics will be able to quite pick that up. We've got a little coffee maker going behind us. So thanks for being with us, Mike. If you'd like to kick things off, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you very much. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Mike Donahue. I'm the part-time executive director of the Vermont Press Association. With me today is John Flowers, who is the past president of the VPA, who I'll let him introduce himself, but basically some of you know is a senior staff writer at the Addison Independent group of newspapers. We're hoping Lisa Loomis, who is the current president, was going to be able to join us. She may still, she was, would rather be here, I think, than in the dentist chair, but that's where she was
Oh, no.
earlier. So anyway, just a little background. The Vermont Press Association represents the interests of about 36 daily and non-daily newspapers that cover and circulate in Vermont. Our roots go back to the 1860s. We established our headquarters, permanent headquarters, in the St. Michael's journalism department in the mid 1980s. My background, some of you may know, I wrote for the Burlington Free Press for 46 years. I took an early buyout and I'm semi-retired, but I still write for a bunch of dailies and non-dailies all across Vermont, and just couldn't completely kick the bug, I guess, of covering the news. Also, I served for 3 decades at St. Michael's College as an adjunct professor in journalism and as a academic advisor. I would note the chair is a graduate of St. Michael's, I believe, and although he was led astray, he didn't join journalism. He was he was smart. He went somewhere else.
Yeah, I love and respect a lot of the folks who are teaching in that department, but I was a biochemistry major and spent a lot of time in the lab.
And clearly a lot smarter than us. So, I mean,
I don't know about that.
This committee was under the gun, I know, early on to crank out the temporary extension to the open meeting law, and we didn't get a chance to get our, hello, who we are kind of thing, and that's why we're doing it today. I do appreciate Chairman McCarthy did note that in the when he testified in the Senate that he did say we would get a chance, and clearly I know you're going to be working on a permanent bill, and we look forward to helping with anything we can. Several of you are new to the legislature and or new to the committee. We try not to bug you too much, but we have been called on through the years to offer expertise on things that are near and dear to us, which is primarily government transparency, the open meeting law, the public records law, and so forth. So we do appreciate the work of this committee. We've seen it firsthand for many decades, and I salute you for what you do and what your colleagues in the Senate have done. I consider this one of the hardest working committees in the State House. And now you've suddenly got military affairs added to your plate. And you're going to have to listen to Michael Morgan, I guess, a whole lot more when you come to military affairs. You know, so you're really going to be under the gun now. So, and he and I go back a little way, so I can jab him because I'm sure he's going to jab me when he has me on the floor. So, but we appreciate the fact that we have been invited in to offer expertise, a little history of open meeting and public records. Vermont, for the longest time, when stacked up against the 50 states or the other 49, often got an F grade for transparency. The state did. Occasionally we'd get a D- or a D, but we were always at the low end of the 50 states. And in recent years, this committee, along with the Senate committee, worked very hard to improve the open meeting law, the public records law, and transparency in general. And Vermont got moved up toward the top of the list. Well, Governor Shumlin signed both those bills. Unfortunately, now other states don't want to be in last place, and they're sort of leapfrogging over us. So it's an ongoing issue that we've got to address, and we look forward to you working on the open meeting. We've got a few things that we think our members who attend countless meetings each year of school boards, of select boards, planning commissions, recreation committee. I mean, our reporters are out in the field covering those things and see a lot of issues with the open meeting law that, at some point, hopefully will be addressed. So we hear it from all 650,000 Vermonters. People call us, stop us at meetings and have concerns, and we're glad to share those with you. So that's a little brief overview. I'm glad to take some questions. I throw it over to John Flowers if he wants to add a few things, but this was more just a chance to say hello. And like I said, I know there's some new members.
Thanks, John. Yeah, we'd love to kick it to you.
Sure. My name's John Flowers. I graduated from the Northeastern University School of Journalism in 1984. I've been pretty much a newspaper reporter ever since then, joining the Independent in 1990, where I've been covering primarily Addison County, but also statewide issues, I guess for almost 33 years now. I just would agree with what Mike said, and we really hold transparency dear. It's becoming harder for us. As you obviously know, our ranks are shrinking, and the more impediments we have to getting information, public information, the harder it is, and to get the information out, and the worse it is for people trying to find things out. So when we hear of initiatives to, for example, increase the amount of time that towns are given to generate meeting minutes, because we can't be at all of them, that concerns us. We are eager for the return to live meetings. And we also find ourselves sometimes frustrated with the lack of information coming out of the Vermont State Police. We've worked with them in the past to try and get a timely flow of good press releases, and that's not going as well as we had hoped. So those are just some of the issues that we routinely watch. We know you have a lot of work on your plate, but we'd appreciate it if you reached out to us if there's anything you think that would be helpful for us to give our insights into. And I'm happy to work with all of you, and certainly would provide all my contact information to you in case you wanted me to weigh in on anything.
We deeply appreciate the offer to testify and offer and the perspective of the Vermont Press Corps here, because so many of the things that we do touch on with this committee's jurisdiction do have those ramifications. And I want to apologize for the oversight and not inviting you when we were busily trying to get to H42. And it was nice to see Mike when we were both in the Senate together when it got over to that side. But I want to make sure that I'm having you top of mind when we're dealing with any of the issues that kind of touch on your profession and the work that you do to inform the public. So we're wanting to make sure that the committee knew who you were, and that you know that we're want to have you in and hear your perspective and have you help us make our bills as good as they can so that the public knows what's going on with their government. I think that's a shared value for all of us.
It's great to hear.
Chairman.
We are very likely to pick back up the conversation and probably at the very beginning of the second year of the biennium address a longer term. I think we'll do some work on the remote meeting, looking at things like what are the best practices for doing remote meetings, and some of the things I'd really like for colleagues to help us think about is, you mentioned the desire to return to live meetings. One of the things that came out for the legislature was this ability to have everything recorded, everything posted on YouTube that we do here. And I am so thankful that we're back live, but there are some advantages about the hybrid system that we have. And I hope that you've been able to, access and take advantage of some of the increased transparency and accountability that the system provides. But I also know that not a lot of the municipalities have access to the kind of resources we have here. These expensive cameras and the sound equipment and the big screens and all of the things that have facilitated this hybrid environment are one of the most challenging things for smaller municipalities and boards and commissions that are far flung. So figuring out when it's okay to do a remote meeting without a physical location and what standard of recording, records keeping, transparency needs to be there, I think is going to be really key to that discussion. And I'm looking forward to getting your feedback about that and being in dialogue with you and people who are doing the kind of work of volunteering on boards and serving on commissions and so that's one of the key areas I think for the next year or two or 4 or 5 that we're all going to be working on together.
Yeah, we certainly find the recorded meetings and the live meetings helpful, as my esteemed colleague will tell you as well. Unfortunately, not all Vermonters are capable of receiving, through the internet. There's some, as you know, remote parts of the state where logging into a select board meeting or a meeting such as this is very tough because of the technology that is lacking in some parts of the state. So I would just put that out there as well.
I think that's why we sort of encourage somewhat, hybrid meetings and not have everybody in their own individual spaces, but that there actually be an anchor spot or a central spot where the general public could show up. But we're getting into the weeds a little bit here, so I'll leave it at that, and we can talk more. We did. I don't remember what year it was. It was, I don't know if you're going to be doing a summer study, but I think it was 1998. Jerry Kreitzer was the chair, and I know that they spent the whole summer having weekly meetings in Montpelier, going over open meeting law and or maybe public records law, but that was a priority, and we spent time, and that's why the bill got to be as good as it did. It came a long way. So again, we look forward to working with you in any way we can.
thank you for being here today. Anything else you want to leave us with before we take a break and then get into some more budget testimony?
No, I think that was basically it. We just wanted to say our hello and, thank you for having us in and appreciate the chance to help you any way we can as we look at open meeting, public records, and anything else dealing with transparency. Thank you.
Well, thanks for being with us. I'm gonna adjourn us for 15 minutes here. We'll be back at 10:30 with Agency of Digital Services with diving in on some of their one-time requests for the next year's budget. And really appreciate all the work you all are doing at the Press Association. And I'm deeply grateful for having local press in Vermont. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Good luck this session.